Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out to the Fine and Art 2022 Saturday morning kickoff. Today, I'm really happy to have George Gann from the Institute for Regional Conservation here. Without further ado, George Gann.
Thanks, Kent. Good morning, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks everybody for coming and listening to the talk on beach conservation efforts in Delray Beach, past and present. So we're going to spend about 15 or 20 minutes talking. I'm going to go through a little bit of history, set up the context of conservation in Delray Beach, and then we're going to have a question and answers after. If anybody has anything they want to add or anything they want to ask. So I'm going to start off by introducing myself a little bit in relation to the context of the talk. I'm from Miami-Dade County. My ancestors arrived in 1910 as agricultural pioneers, so we've had a long history in the community, watching the incredible change that's happened to South Florida. I've been working in Palm Beach County since the mid-1990s. In terms of education, I have a degree in international affairs and environmental conservation, and I have more than 40 years experience working in conservation and restoration in South Florida. I'm the executive director of the Institute for Regional Conservation and the international policy lead for the Society for Ecological Restoration. I publish quite a bit, and one of the things I've been able to contribute to is the International Principles and Standards for the Practice of Ecological Restoration, which is a global document that guides restoration efforts around the world. I'm a certified ecological restoration practitioner, and I work both locally and globally, and that's kind of my thing, trying to figure out how do we take big ideas like climate change and actually do something on the local basis. My first dune project I did in 1986 at the age of 25. I contracted and was awarded a $500,000 contract on Miami Beach to do dune restoration, one of the first projects in South Florida. All right, so when I do these kinds of talks, I like people to use their imagination. I don't have slides. We have a couple of pictures we'll refer to, but I want you to use your imagination. We're going to set up kind of the context of conservation in terms of what's happened. And so in terms of South Florida, prior to the 1770s, this was the home of the Glades Indians. Okay, so we need to keep that in mind, that this can look completely different. The intracoastal was fresh water. There were no mangroves back there. There was Lake Worth was fresh water and the little lagoons and creeks. The Native Americans used fire to keep the coastal systems open and to facilitate habitat for wildlife. There would be Florida panthers. There would be vast, uncountable numbers of birds in systems like this. The last Native Americans died out around the 1770s. And there was a long quiet period when there were very few people in this area. Settlement of the Miccosukee and Seminole. This is part of their tribal, historical tribal territory. The permanent settlement of the Miccosukee and Seminole occurred in the 1830s. So you have these decades-long gap when virtually nobody was here. In the early 1900s was when settlement of this area occurred. And so when my ancestors arrived in Miami-Dade County in 1910, let's just think about this for a moment, there were fewer than 12,000 people in Miami-Dade County. There were fewer than 6,000 people in Palm Beach County. Over the next 50 years, through the 1950s, people flocked to South Florida, and many came because of the beaches. It's just beautiful, and people love the coast, and they wanted to be here. But because of this, there were unintended consequences of the settlement of South Florida. So one of the things that happened was the widening of the inlets and the deepening of the channels. This caused the interruption of the flow of sand from north to south. This also caused the salinization. Seawater rushed in to these inland areas and completely changed the character of the ecosystems. People built hard structures, jetties to protect the inlets, and seawalls and other hard structures that also affected the flow of sand. There was also reflective energy that was created from seawalls, for example, where waves would bash against the seawalls and carry the sand out to sea. By the 1960s and early 1970s, basically most of the beaches in southeastern Florida had washed out to sea. And so you can see this in this one, I guess it's the image on the bottom there. where the beach dune is completely gone. There's just nothing left. And so this had a lot of impacts. And some of those impacts include the economic collapse of the economies in many coastal towns. So when I did the project in Miami Beach in the mid-1980s, one of the reasons for that renourishment and the beach restoration was to try and revive the economy, because people wanted to come for the beach and the beach wasn't here anymore, so people stopped coming. There was also a huge loss of coastal biodiversity. So animals like sea turtles were no longer able to nest on the beach. And so there was a rapid decline in the population of sea turtles, but also the loss of all of the native species, the plants and the animals that inhabited the beaches and the dunes and the coastal strand. There was generally a lack of understanding about coastal processes, and some of the things that were tried, like this revetment that you see in Delray Beach in 1968, these engineered, hard structured solutions basically all failed. All right, so beginning in the 1970s and 1980s, people started to develop soft solutions or nature-based solutions to deal with this problem of erosion, because we needed to get the beaches back, both economically, but also in terms of early thinking about sustainability and species conservation and all of the other attributes of the beaches and dunes. So there were a series of changes that occurred in this period, and one of those was beach nourishment. So this started happening all over Florida and other places when people realized we needed to get the sand back up on the beach. People dealt with sand transfer. How do we get the sand across the inlets? So the inlets is interrupting the flow of sand. We have to get the sand to leap over each of these inlets so that the flow of sand from north to south can continue. And there was a dismantling of the hard structures. So the jetties and the seawalls and all of those things were dismantled and removed from the beach system to allow the natural systems, the soft processes that had occurred for time immemorial to continue. But many of the early nourishment projects failed or did not perform to the standard that people would want, because there was nothing to hold the sand. So the sand, we'd pump the sand up and the sand would just wash back out to sea. So there was early recognition that we needed to do other things, such as revegetation, and also sand fences were widely used during this early period. There was also work on sea turtle conservation during that period. So when beaches were renourished, the turtles could come back and start to nest again, but there were so few turtles that literally people were putting chain link fences around individual nests because they were so rare. There was a lot of learning about this process of restoration or revegetation of the beach dunes. And so some of the early trials were inappropriate or didn't work, such as having the first plants on the dune be sea grapes, or even the exotic scaevola. So in the early project on Miami Beach, the exotic scaevola was spec'd in by the architect because it was good at binding sand. Well, that was not the right solution, you know. So what we saw over time was a shift to native species, the exclusion of anything that was non-native, and then also the focus on sea oats and other grasses and native species that are highly adapted to this beach community. By the 1980s, people were working on more complex systems. So in the beginning it was 1 or 2 or maybe 5 species of native plants in these projects, but as time went on, people started to put in more complex species mixes, and also to work on some of these systems like coastal dunes. So not just the grassy front of the beach, but also what happens in the back of the dune, and trying to restore that more complex system. People also started to work on threatened species. So species that had been depleted and that were rare and recognized by government officials as being in need of help, like beach jacomani, for example, a federally listed species. But this part of the restoration process of using more complex mixes of species was not all that well understood. So there were some people that realized that we can restore biodiversity, also restore beach functionality, but there were other folks that were saying we just need to get our 3 species in so that we can get the dunes stabilized and we can protect the shoreline. All right, so we're going to talk for a couple minutes about Delray Beach itself. So what we see in this photo on the bottom is that by 1970, by 1968, in fact, the beach was gone. There was this early process to put in a revetment to try and keep the sea from washing out A1A and affecting buildings like the ones across the street, but that didn't work. And so by 1970, that revetment was removed and renourishment process started. And Delray Beach was very early in the process, one of the first municipalities to get a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers and to participate in the renourishment process. And over the years, Delray's had 6 nourishment projects and 3 emergency projects, totaling about 9 renourishment events since 1970. And those happen about every 8 years. There's a major renourishment event. In the early years, there were different, like I was talking about, there were different trials of different kind of systems of how do we hold the sand in place, what kind of plants do we plant, where do we plant them, do we use sand fences and other kinds of things. And so there were lots of experiments, but some of those didn't work very well, but over time, it was a robust dune system with native species, and a system to do that was developed. And the dune has continued to grow. So if you look at the photo, you see that this is A1A, and the ocean was right here, right? And so the dune has grown incredibly since this period. And I just did some measurements on Google Earth, and the beach in some areas, the vegetated part of the beach in some areas is 200 feet wide or more. So that's incredible accretion of sand over time. This beach is exceptional in southeastern Florida. It's exceptional in Florida. It's exceptional in the world in terms of the amount of sand that has accreted and the number of species that are found in this system. It has helped the recovery of many native species, from sea turtles to native plants and many other kinds of wildlife. So the city of Delray Beach should be incredibly proud of this beach and the amount of biodiversity that it protects, and it helps to recover. And so we are an example of a conservation system that provides the economic and the social benefits of a healthy dune with the conservation and biodiversity benefits. All right, so we want to move forward. We have this great dune system, this great beach, but what happens moving forward? So we're all aware that the planet is unraveling, as some would say, that we are facing global crises in terms of climate change and sea level rise, biodiversity extinction, and so on and so forth. So becoming sustainable is a start. So that's not losing things and providing for ourselves in the future. It's a good start, but we have to do more. And so for those who are not aware, 2021 to 2030 is the United Nations decade on ecosystem restoration, because the only way that we're going to deal with these huge problems is through recovery and restoration. We can't just keep things where they are. We have to move things in a positive direction. And this is also important socially and individually and personally, because none of us like to look at the news and say, this is impossible, this is bigger than me, I can't do anything. And that's not true. Each one of us has to do something to help move this forward. So we like to think about the recovery of lost biodiversity and functions that provide for both nature and people. So to give you an example, IRC has done inventory work on the number of plant species that were found in southern Palm Beach County in these coastal uplands. And that list now is north of 250 species of native plants. Delray is incredibly diverse. It has about 125 species of native plants. So that's a good number. Between Atlantic dunes and a municipal beach, about half of the historically known species from this area are here. But many of those species are depleted. They're found in really tiny patches, and the dune structure is could still evolve to be in a healthier place. So we have a long way to go, and we have challenges as well. So invasive species. No matter what we do, we can go in here today and remove all the invasive species, but new populations will come in. And so we will always have to manage the dune in terms of keeping the invasive species out. We have issues like light pollution and how it affects turtles. We have issues of sea level rise and climate change, which leads to bigger and stronger storms that cause massive erosional processes along the coast. But we have knowledge and we have tools of how to deal with these things. And so the City of Delray Beach and IRC and other partners are working together to try and make sure that we move forward in a positive way, that we're not just reacting to things that are going on, but learning from our experience, using the tools that are available to make the dune healthier and healthier and healthier over time. So there are some programs and some tools that the public should be aware of. One of them is IRC has, the Institute for Regional Conservation has a Restoring the Gold Coast program that we're conducting in Delray Beach and Boca and other places in Palm Beach County. And the idea here is to bring in those species or to augment or reinforce the species that have been depleted over time, to try and increase the population of the rare plants and animals. But there's also some tools that you can use no matter where you live. If you live, a mile in the interior, you live in another city in South Florida, we have a tool called we have a tool called Natives for Your Neighborhood, where you can type in your zip code and get lists of native plants that are appropriate for your garden. The bottom line is that everybody can make a contribution, whether it's coming out here and picking up microplastics that are going to affect turtles, or helping to remove invasive species, or planting native species, or doing so at your home or business. Everybody can make a contribution. So I want to thank Kent and the City of Delray Beach for this opportunity to talk, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, George.
Thank you, George. Really appreciate that information. We really are lucky to have this fabulous dude here who brings so much value to the City of Delray Beach.